Hi, first grade. Mrs. Little here. Today I am going to read a story to you, and we are going to stop a few times during the story and talk about our comprehension strategy. So this week we are working on point of view. And point of view, when we are reading a story, is the way that a character thinks or feels in the story. And we're able to tell the character's point of view based on clues in the story. And the clues can be things that the character says, so their words, things that the character does, their actions, or things that other people do or say about the character. And you'll notice I am wearing a hat today because the character in our story wears a hat in the story. What we are reading today is Luke Goes to Bat, and the author is Rachel Isadora. Now, this is a little bit of a long story. So what we're going to do is we are going to hear part of it today and work on the comprehension, and then I will come back tomorrow and finish the rest of the book. All right, Luke Goes to Bat. Now, if we look at the cover, we see a little boy with a bat in his hand. So I'm thinking that this book is probably about baseball. And looking through the pictures, you're going to notice that this story takes place in the past. This actually takes place in the 1940s or 1950s, somewhere between there. And that was a long time ago. That was almost 60 years ago. So this book didn't take place when I was a little girl. It took place at the time that my parents or even my grandparents were little or were a young adult. So, and this time there were not cell phones. There were cars. They didn't have a lot of the technology. There weren't computers, there weren't iPads and things like that. So we are going to hear this book. This is realistic fiction. And what that means is that this is a story that could really happen. It doesn't mean it did really happen, but it could. All right, Luke Goes to Bat. It was Brooklyn. It was summer. It was baseball. All day long, the kids on Bedford Avenue played stickball in the streets. Now, when we look at this picture, we see a lot of things going on. We see all of these children playing ball in the street. They live in a big city. Actually, they live in Brooklyn, which is in New York City. And there weren't a lot of fields for the kids to play. So they just played right in the street. Now, if you notice, the word that they used was stickball, and that's a compound word. They were playing baseball, but they had to use sticks to play. That tells us that they didn't have real bats, so they just had to play with a stick. And we see all of these kids doing things except our main character. He's just sitting there. And I noticed that his body language, he kind of has his hands folded up like this. His shoulders are slumped. That gives me a clue about how he's feeling. Make a guess. How do you think he's feeling right now? Did you say maybe bored or sad or maybe interested because he's looking like this? We don't know. To find out. Except for Luke. When you're older, his big brother Nicky told him, "He's just a squirt," said one of the other kids, laughing. All right, so this picture is kind of sad. We see Luke's older brother, and we see this other boy, and then we see Luke. Now, this boy is pointing and laughing and called him a squirt. His brother basically told him, "You're too little to play." He said, "You can play when you're older." And look at Luke. His head is hung. His eyes are down. He hasn't said a word yet, but I bet you can guess how he's feeling. How would you be feeling if someone told you you were too little to play and then laughed at you and called you a name? Think about that for a minute. I'm going to think about what we read so far and try to figure out Luke's point of view. So in this column, I have the character, and our character is, of course, Luke. Now, the clue that we're going to focus on is the clue that happened on this page. And the clue that I wrote is he hangs his head when the boys laugh at him. And remember I told you, I bet you know how he's feeling. So think about it. If you were Luke and you really wanted to play baseball, you're watching all the other kids play, and your older brother says, you're too little, and then another older kid laughs at you and calls you a squirt, how would you feel? I wrote, Luke is sad about not being able to play. So this is Luke's point of view right now. At this part in the story, he is sad. Now, we're going to keep reading and see if Luke changes his point of view during the story. So Luke watched the games from the curb. Then he'd practice. He threw the ball against the wall next to a deli. He practiced his swing over and over again. He ran as fast as he could up and down the block. He wanted to be ready when it was his time. All right, so here is Luke throwing the ball against a city wall. Here he is batting over and over by himself. And here he is just running up and down the street. And at night, whenever the Dodgers were playing, Luke hurried up to the roof where he could see the lights of Ebbets Field. When he heard the crowd go wild, he imagined his favorite player, Jackie Robinson, had hit a home run. Someday, Luke thought, I will hit a home run too. Now, in this picture, we see a couple of things. We see Luke has climbed to the top of his building. So he didn't live in a house. He lives in an apartment. Remember, he lives in the city. So he climbs to the top of his apartment, and he can see the stadium from his house, but he can't actually watch the game. Now, remember, I told you this took place long ago in the past. So Luke can't turn on the TV and watch it. He probably doesn't have a television in his house. He can't get his cell phone and just watch the game. No cell phones at this time. So what he is doing here, and this is kind of a cool picture, he is listening. And all he does is use his imagination, and he imagines what is happening. But he can tell when the crowd gets really loud, he knows that something good happened, and he's thinking about his favorite player. Finally, one morning, the team was short a player. Does that mean that all the players were really short on their team? No, that means that they didn't have enough players. Frankie had to go to his aunt's. Who are we gonna get? Hey, said Luke, what about me? Everyone was quiet. Oh, come on, said his brother. Give him a chance. Oh, we got nobody else. He better not mess up. They put him in left field. No balls came that way, so he just stood there. All right, so at this point of the story, we see that the team doesn't have enough players, and Luke says, what about me? So this is where I'm going to stop today, and we are going to talk about how Luke's feeling at this point of the story, and then I will finish the rest tomorrow. All right, let's stop and think about the part of the story that we just heard. So after Luke was feeling sad that he couldn't play and that the big kids made fun of him, we saw his actions on these 2 pages. And his actions were that he runs, he hits, and he throws over and over. He keeps practicing. The book also tells us that he wants to be ready when it's his time to play. So this tells me 2 things about Luke's point of view and how he's feeling. One, it tells me he's a hard worker, right? He doesn't give up. He keeps practicing, even though it's by himself. Next, I know that he is hopeful that he'll get to play. And when someone is hopeful, it means that they are wishing and they are thinking it's going to happen. So Luke keeps practicing because he's hoping he gets to play. And then when he gets the chance, the team doesn't have enough players, he asks if he can play. This shows that he is brave. And the reason that I think he's feeling brave and acting brave is because just the day before, these boys were making fun of him and telling him he was too little, but he volunteered to play, even though they did that to him. So at this point in the story, we can see what Luke does, we can hear what he's thinking, and then we see the words and hear the words that he's saying. So his point of view has changed from being sad to being hopeful and brave. All right, tomorrow we are going to read the rest of the story and find out what happens to Luke. Have a good Thursday, boys and girls.